What? What about the rest of the family? Matilda was very clear when drafting the will. She said that none of her other relatives deserved to benefit from her death, as they had neglected her in life. Therefore, she left everything to her granddaughter, to use as she sees fit. Never! That can't happen! We deserve some of that money. We are his children, by the way. I was waiting for her to die so I could get some money and buy a house. This can't be happening. We will settle this in court. Aaron must have manipulated her or something.
This is unheard of. Surely Matilda was a bit out of her mind when she had that thing drafted. It should be nullified and the money distributed equally among all the children.
Ever since I was a child, I've always been very close to my grandmother Matilda. This wasn't so much due to a matter of personality, nor because I was the only granddaughter in the family, but rather a purely practical matter. I was the one who lived closest to her, and therefore also the one who visited her most often. My grandmother had 3 kids: my dad, my Uncle Sam, and my Aunt Jessica. My grandmother lived alone in a large house with its own garden, in a small town about 20 miles from the city. All of her children were already adults, with their own lives established, and had decided many years ago to leave behind life in the countryside to settle indefinitely in the city, where they already had their respective jobs, apartments, and where their children were enrolled in school. One could say, perhaps, that the idea of living at that distance was to be able to visit Grandma Matilda on weekends when people were less busy with their day-to-day activities, but that simply didn't happen. You see, I had lost both my parents in a tragic car accident when I was young. So Grandma basically raised me, and I had a bond with her. I can remember we had a lot in common. So even when I moved out from her house, I was often the only granddaughter to visit and check on her.
I wish the rest of your cousins and uncles would make the effort to come by more often.
They don't?
Not even on Sundays, and I know for a fact that nobody is busy on Sundays. It wouldn't be the first time I hear that one of my children has used the last day of the week to go fishing or to take the kids to the pool. I'm not even asking for them to come every week. Once a month would be enough for me.
Don't be discouraged. Next month we're having a family gathering. You'll be able to see them all there. That should have been a comfort, but it really didn't mean anything remotely similar. The family gathering I was talking about was an event we organized once a year, where all of Matilda's relatives would gather on a Saturday at her house for lunch. It was more of a charade than anything else, where we all pretended to get along well and were very close to each other for as long as the gathering lasted. These kinds of meetings never went wrong, in the sense that no one fought. However, they didn't exactly serve to bring people together either, because as soon as the clock struck 6 in the evening, everyone dispersed to their respective homes, as if the workday were already over, and they wanted nothing more to do with the matter until the following year. It was a pity how unsupportive they were of Grandma Matilda, but back then I didn't dwell on it much. Her loss was my gain after all, since I enjoyed being with her, and the fact that she didn't have visitors so often allowed me to spend more time at her house. So, I spent all my childhood and adolescence in this routine, until I became the only one who visited my grandmother weekly. And I thought it would continue to be that way, until my grandmother became seriously ill and suddenly my uncles and cousins started to visit regularly.
What's this miracle of you coming to see me?
What miracle are you talking about? We've always been here. We've just been a bit busy in the city, with our work.
Yes, of course, even on vacations. Every weekend? I hope you're not waiting for me to drop dead so you can get your hands on my inheritance, because that would be in very poor taste, considering how neglected you've left me. We would never do such a thing. It's unbelievable that you would think that, considering how much we've always helped you. And furthermore, speaking of helping, how would you feel about moving in with us? I'm sure you'd be more comfortable and better taken care of. It's not necessary. I prefer to stay in my house. I already have Erin to take care of me. She's studying nursing and is perfectly capable of taking care of me.
If my relatives were upset that Grandma refused to move in with them, they didn't let me know with words. They simply repeated the offer countless times in the following months, until my grandmother finally passed away, ensuring that she would have a better quality of life in any of their respective apartments. I felt bad for doubting their good intentions, but I couldn't help it. It seemed very strange that they spent years ignoring my grandmother, and then suddenly, when she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, they showed up like good Samaritans to take care of her, under the pretext that family is there to help each other in difficult times. In any case, My suspicions that there was foul play somewhere became evident when the will was read.
All of Matilda's possessions, including the house and the money in her bank accounts, will be left to Aaron. What? What about the rest of the family? Matilda was very clear when drafting the will. She said that none of her other relatives deserved to benefit from her death, as they had neglected her in life. Therefore, she left everything to her granddaughter, to use as she sees fit. Never! That can't happen! We deserve some of that money. We are his children, by the way. I was waiting for her to die so I could get some money and buy a house. This can't be happening. We will settle this in court. Aaron must have manipulated her or something.
This is unheard of. Surely Matilda was a bit out of her mind when she had that thing drafted. It should be nullified and the money distributed equally among all the children.
My grandmother was perfectly lucid until her last days.
This will was drafted several years before she was diagnosed with her illness. Furthermore, we are professionals here. We wouldn't have allowed a woman who wasn't in her full faculties to draft such a document.
That served to momentarily silence my relatives, seeing that their anger had nowhere to go. My grandmother was richer than they initially imagined, and now that all that money was going to me, my life was going to be even better. If they wanted to keep a portion of the inheritance, they would have to do something about it, and boy, they did. At first, they tried to kindly convince me that what was stated in the will was a mistake, that even if Grandma had written those terrible things on purpose, I was a good person, and surely wouldn't leave them without their share of those assets. Then, seeing that didn't work to make me give in, they opted for more drastic measures.
We didn't want to resort to this, but since you're forcing our hand, we'll have to take it to court. We are sure you manipulated our mother into giving you everything.
To court? What nonsense. And how do you plan to do that? It's already been established that Grandma drafted the will long before she got sick, and she was always of sound mind.
We'll see about that when it's properly analyzed by experts. And believe me, when this is over, you'll regret turning your back on your family when they needed you the most.
Although it was to be expected, right? She's always been ungrateful.
I didn't know what they meant by those insults, because in the end, I was the only one who was with my grandmother until her last moments. But if they wanted to spend the little money they had left on lawyers to try to win a lost case, that was fine by me. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, so I had nothing to worry about. The problem arose when I realized that my relatives, in the war they had waged against me, started talking to the press and appearing on local television to speak ill of me, saying that I had always been the black sheep of the family, and that now, due to a supposed mistake in the will of a sick elderly woman, I was refusing to provide them with much-needed money for them to continue subsisting. It was ridiculous, and therefore I thought it would be appropriate to return the favor in a similar manner, instead of waiting for the verdict of the professionals. So I spoke to a friend.
What do you plan to do? I have some friends who work at the local newspaper. If you want, we can let them know so you can tell your side of the story.
No, that would sound like I need to defend myself from an attack because I could be guilty. I prefer to leave the press for last. First, I would like to try another approach. Did you know that my relatives are extremely superstitious?
And what does that have to do with this?
I was just thinking that, given their belief in horoscopes and astrology, it's very likely that if a medium tells them to do something, they'll comply without hesitation. In fact, I knew that consulting mediums and watching shows about the supernatural was a common activity for most of my family members, as they loved those things and were strong believers in the mystical. So I got to work. I convinced a friend of mine to read the cards for my uncles, without them knowing that he had any connection to me. In the end, my friend did what any tarot reader would have done when encountering a potential client. He gave them hope that everything would turn out well, that no matter how dark the clouds seemed on the horizon, luck would eventually be on their side. In other words, this fake medium convinced my relatives to invest as much as they could in lawyers to defend their case, to have no fear of overspending, because in the end, the verdict would be in their favor and they would receive much more money than they invested. Of course, it was all lies. Not only did my relatives have a lot to lose, but while they were distracted by the deception, I took the opportunity to clean my new house from Grandma, and while doing so, I found a recording of her that ended up being crucial for my case.
It's a recording from 5 years ago, long before the lady became ill. And in it, Mrs. Matilda explains her reasons for leaving her entire fortune to Aaron. That's not possible. Surely Aaron manipulated her to make that video and change the will, just as we already told the press. No, Aaron had no knowledge of the video's existence until recently. No one knew except Matilda and her notary. Additionally, along with the video, official documents have been found proving that the elderly woman was in full possession of her faculties.
No, there was no trickery involved. Grandma Matilda even went so far as to insult her own children in that recording, calling them ungrateful for not giving her more love and attention in life. So it was clear who the real villains were in that story. It wasn't even necessary to go to court because it was clear that the inheritance would all be mine. I ended up giving that final press conference clarifying everything and finally responding to my family's threats. They, on the other hand, had spent too much on a lost case that left my aunt and uncle broke, and to make matters worse. Now the whole town was aware of the kind of people they were. Neighbors vandalized their houses or stopped speaking to them altogether, and they, unable to recover the invested money or return to the pristine reputation they had before all this happened, they were forced to move far away. And I heard my uncle in the new state mow people's lawns while my aunt took up a cleaning job. As for me, I felt at peace. I had won, and they wouldn't bother me anymore. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.